welcome back to the Underwater Photography Show. I'm Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard.
And we are here in the midst of competition season, and a couple big competitions have recently put out their winners. And one of those is DPG Masters competition, formerly DPG Wet Pixel competition, for those who are trying to keep up with the history of it. So it's a well-known competition. Unlike the ocean art video that some of you probably will have watched recently. They don't have as many categories, so there are less winners to go through here. But some pretty spectacular imagery in here, so we will get it going.
I quite like the fact this year as well that they had this group of judges, one from each manufacturer. So they're kind of, there's no manufacturer bias in the thing. I thought it was quite fun. Maybe I'll stick that on the screen now so you can see the judging panel and their affiliations. So they're all rooting for their own photos. Let me pull up the pictures. So I haven't got the names of these, and I don't know if you have, Matt.
Oh, good call. I will pull up the names real quick, but the first one I know, we have the Mobula race here.
Yes, it's the Mobula's up first.
Which was the winner of the traditional category, and this was by Vanessa Mignon. So Alex, if you want to talk a little bit about this, I will pull up the rest of the names while you're doing that.
Yeah, I think schools of Mobulas are a very charismatic subject. They are a wow subject. They have been, in the competition scene, I would say, for probably 4 or 5 years now. When they first arrived, they kind of swept the board with everything. And then I think in recent years, we kind of judges are looking for something a little bit special. And I think what, for me, this picture works is you've got the School of Mobulas contained within the frame, which I think is particularly spectacular. It really communicates their schooling together. But I really like that kind of central focal point in this shot where you just see, face after face or cephalic fins after cephalic fins, coming up through the middle of the picture, which really makes clear what the rest of the school is. And, I think sometimes with the Mobula shots, you get them going away or, from the camera. You get that sense of loads of animals, but you don't get that same connection. So spectacular to see. And I think one of those photos that just makes you wish you were there. And, for me, it does offer something, fresh and strong and original with these subjects. We've seen them shot every way. And so, an available like wide angle shot, which is uncropped, as well, you're not going to crop because you'd ideally like a wider lens, is ideal for a traditional category because no strobe equals no backscatter equals easy for this type of category. So I'd kind of like them to see them give a bit more credit to maybe shots that are harder to pull off in a traditional category rather than just going, you've passed the bar, therefore we'll ignore the fact it's a traditional category.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing to mention with the traditional category, at least specifically for DPG, is that it's global edits only. So no cropping, no backscatter removal, no dodging and burning specific parts of the frame.
Just a lot of dehaze.
yeah, exactly. And I actually like the diver in here too. It provides a little bit of scale. It makes the school look massive. I mean, obviously there's forced perspective there, but that's all about kind of trying to emphasize, or that's a tool to use with photography is to
make your monk's pygmy mobulas look a little bit bigger.
Yeah, exactly. The one thing I will mention, since we're not going to show it here, is the overall winner was actually a video by Iko Jones documenting the whole salmon life cycle from egg to death on Vancouver Island. So if anybody wants to see that, head over to underwatercompetition.com.
And you've told me it's a spectacular film.
Yes, it is.
So that should shut up my friends who have been joking around saying none of the stills were good enough to win overall. And actually, it's not that they weren't good enough. It was just that the film was particularly spectacular.
Yeah, Iko, I will tell a little story here. I've been out doing the salmon with him, and I spent probably 6 hours underwater one day, bouncing between a couple of pools, shooting the salmon. He stood in the exact same spot for probably 7 hours trying to work on one particular frame. And I might actually be in this video, but either way, that tells you the kind of dedication he put into creating this. And it's really worth the watch, and it's spectacular and a worthy overall winner.
Fantastic. Right, I'm going to move us on to our next one, which I guess is from a conservation category. And it's a picture of a sea lion with, what looks like plastic debris that's gone around its neck when it's young, and it's kind of grown into it, and it's ended up, with a tight choker around its neck. I like this shot. I think there is a good conservation message. I think we've seen the plastic message before. The sea lion actually looks quite happy and healthy, looking at its coat and everything. Which is maybe sometimes you can catch a pose where the pose makes it look not so in a bit more distress. I like the black and the white, the fact that the sea lion is very dark in the frame and the plastic is very white. It really makes it jump out. I think this picture would benefit from a crop. I don't know if that's allowed in this category, but I suspect it is. And I think just cropping this picture in would just, basically make the subject matter bigger in the frame. If I was viewing this on my phone, I might not necessarily pick up the conservation angle. Whereas with a tighter crop, I think that would be more in the frame. So yeah, I would suggest a tighter crop on this one would just generally ramp up the impact, which is what you want from a conservation shot.
So this is by Matthew Mack, and just reading his caption here, his little backstory. He said the sea lion seemed healthy. They witnessed it participating in the destruction of 2 different bait balls, and seemed to be doing perfectly okay. So hopefully this is. Maybe it's just a lot of blubber and fur that it's constricting, and it's not constricting anything important, and that it doesn't get any tighter. But either way, it's a sad thing to see, but happy to know that the sea lion seems to be doing well as of now.
Yeah, and we've talked about conservation shots before, and I think this finds quite a nice line in making a point without being too gruesome.
Yeah.
But at the same time, highlighting a big issue. I think sometimes I feel conservation pictures, you don't always get some of the bigger issues dealt with because of the fact it's easier photographically to deal with, some of the, maybe some of the smaller issues that are easier to tug on the heartstrings about. And, plastic pollution is obviously a major issue facing the ocean. So yeah, it's good to see a big issue highlighted.
Cool. All right.
Right. Oh, it's me, isn't it?
Yes.
Moving on to the next one, which is a picture of a frog on a lily pad. On a cloudy day.
This one up real quick.
Do you want who's this one by?
This is Luke Ruman.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm skeptical of this image, not in terms of its photographic merits, but in terms of its naturalness. I've seen a lot of frogs in my life, and I can count on one hand the number of them that I've seen sit on a lily pad. And none of them.
Maybe in the next frame he gave it a kiss and it became a prince.
Yeah, maybe.
Or a princess, depending on his inclinations.
Yeah, true. I am skeptical of this one sitting on a lily pad so perfectly, because this is not, to the best of my knowledge, this is not really a lily pad sitting frog. And we have had frogs in this genus in other competitions that were pretty blatantly staged. And I have friends who have corroborated that, who live over in Europe and are quite familiar with these frogs. Again, I would like to apologize to Luke if it's not staged and totally natural. It seems a bit iffy to me.
They're not actually the biggest fans of being in the water.
Yeah.
I mean, it's usual that in Europe, and this looks like the summer because that's when the lily pads are out, the frogs tend to be in the water in the spring, in the very early spring and winter when they spawn. And after that, they tend to live on land, close to water. And obviously they do go in the water, but they are more terrestrial. Everything's possible in photography. And, a lot of competition pictures show those special moments when something really unusual happened, because that's part of what makes it a competition shot. I would say, though, for me as a judge, if you have a subject that the manipulation is a big part of the appeal, or potential manipulation is a big part of the appeal of the shot. It's the appeal of the shot is where the frog is sitting. And add to that the fact that you have a very easily manipulated subject, which is commonly manipulated by photographers. I think you need, as a judge, to ask yourself very carefully, do we want to award this type of shot? Because even if this one isn't manipulated, it will encourage other photographers to say, oh, we need to do that sort of thing in order to win.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can see, the arguments for that. I would, comment that yes, it is a bit dubious, and maybe it will yield those sorts of images in the future. I think there's a few technical things I would comment about. I think it could probably do with a little bit more depth of field. I think that the focus is very good on the eye of the frog, as most autofocus systems would jump straight on the eye. I think in a situation like this, that's meant that the underwater part of the frog is out of focus. And I think that because obviously with a dome port, that's the effect you get. I would like to have seen this shot with a little bit more depth of field. I'm fine with the relatively shallow depth of field look of the image of the frog being in focus and the background being out of focus. It doesn't have to be a f/22 split level shot like we normally do to have the clouds and the trees in focus. Although I don't think it'd be a problem if they were in focus, but I'm okay with them being out of focus. But I'd like to have seen the whole frog, the lily pad, properly in focus, because that's the subject. It's got quite cute little legs, feet and things. It would be nice to see those in the picture. I think that the dome port setup isn't quite right on this one. It's just really geeky underwater photography comment. But looking at the picture now, it just kind of leaps out of me. I think the dome port is a little bit too close. Too far away from the lens. And as a result, if you look at the lines of the top of the frog, they don't quite match with the bottom of the frog. The top of the frog is bigger. It's got a greater magnification than the bottom part. And that's the case of the dome port being a little bit too far away from the lens and basically shrinking the image, the underwater image slightly compared to reality. Obviously, the above water part is not affected by the dome port positioning. Slightly too long a port extension on this one. It's caused the frog to not line up. I don't know what the processing rules are, but if this was my picture, I'd probably maybe just try to tweak that above water half so that the frog was the same size above the surface. Because particularly on the chin, it really sticks out quite a long way from the body of the frog underwater, which I find, it's just an optical effect. It's a natural optical effect captured in camera, but it's an optical effect that annoys me a little bit in the shot.
How would you do that in post if you were going to line them up?
Well, I don't know the rules in the competition, but what you would do is you could just select the whole top half of the image and scale it slightly. It's got a lovely flat split level here, so you would just grab that and just shrink it down using transform. Just copy paste it as a new layer in Photoshop and just transform it from the top edge. So you shrank it so it was the right size.
I've never even heard of such a thing. So
yeah, I mean, just ideally you'd set your dome port up right.
Yeah.
But
I actually like the shallow depth of field here. I'm having trouble seeing the. I'm viewing it really small at the moment, so seeing the out of focus difference is hard for me at the moment. But I like the shallow depth of field. It really draws your attention to the frog, and this is aside from not being able to see that the bottom half is out of focus. But either way, again, apologies to Luke if this was natural, but like you said, I think if you were judging something like this, it might be better to hedge on the side of caution.
Yeah, I think that's probably where you're coming from. It's not like it's outrageous to move a frog for a photo. It's correct. Outrage is with judges awarding a picture that might set a trend for moving subjects.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, that's well said. Better than I said it.
Well, I had thinking time. I was floundering too. Let's move on to another one. And this one for me also maybe sets off a few alarm bells. In that newts obviously spend much more time in the water than frogs. I'm not suggesting that this one was put in the water for this shot. I find it a little unusual that the newt is way out in the deep water, but they swim. It could perfectly easily be there. But if we accept that this is natural, he does look a bit stuck on, but I think that's more the processing. Then I'm sure he was there in the shot. Just whether he was, persuaded to be out there in the middle. He's kind of in a bit of a jaunty angle, like he's been swooshed, which is why I think if he was kind of just chilled out in the water, I kind of feel maybe he's a bit more naturally. Oh yeah, he was just floating about out there. He looks close to the surface, but I don't see the ripples on the surface. So there's that part of it makes me feel not quite right. All that said, image-wise, I love this shot. It's got a great feeling of depth to it. I love the contrast of the predominantly monochrome walls of the cliffs behind or the quarry behind. And I love how that contrasts so well with the super colourful newt. which I think looks really, really nice. And it creates a lovely feeling of depth in the image. There's just a slight unnaturalness in the fact that the newt seems kind of suspended there. There's no feeling that it's been swimming, even though it's moving. You know, you don't see any, I know they're only tiny, but you don't see any disturbance on the surface or anything from it. And maybe it's just the fact that the photographers run, some software to clean it up. And in that has actually removed elements that would make it feel a little bit more natural, because they didn't like the slight disturbances the newt left behind or something like that. But yeah, for me, I like the image. There's just some kind of there's kind of some weird stuff. Like above the newt's head, there's kind of this strange block of blue in the rocks, which I don't quite understand. I think it's just the shadow and the way the rock wall is cut, but it kind of goes square and then it sticks out and it comes back in again. And so, yeah, it's a picture that doesn't sit comfortably with me, although I suspect they're all just, you get weird effects like that because of the ripples on the water and things like that. But yeah, it just feels a little unnatural to me, and would be another one that as a judge, I'd be like, oh, are you sure we're all happy with this? To the other judges. And they probably had that discussion, and the judges on this competition decided that they were.
So this one is by Massimo Zanini. Another to chime in here, if anybody's watching this and knows any of the backstories to these pictures, please feel free to comment them below and correct us if we're talking out of hand here. I like you. I think the image is striking. The white and the blue really contrast well against the orange of the newt. I don't know anything about this location. Obviously, the newts are in there. He's not going to go. People aren't going to go bring newts to quarries to photograph. But typically, and this is my experience, when salamanders, which newts are swimming, they usually go up, they breathe, and they come back down. Having them pause is not completely out of the realm of possibility, but they're vulnerable when they are in the water column, so they generally like to spend as little time there as possible. So I would like to hear, if Massimo ever sees this, I'd like to hear a bit more about this picture.
It might be that this particular quarry, because it looks like a quarry. It's all those straight edges, and therefore the water that these newts are in is probably a pond of the quarry, and just filled up with groundwater. So maybe so it's probably relatively recent, doesn't have a fish population in it.
I would imagine.
Therefore, the newts feel like, oh yeah, we're kings here, and that's why he's kind of cruising around like this.
They also are toxic. So they might just be like, yeah, nobody's going to actually take a bite of me because they'll regret it.
Oh, I didn't know our ones were toxic.
But what's that?
I didn't realize our ones in Europe were
I'm fairly certain. Again, I could be wrong, but I'm fairly certain that they all have at least some slight toxicity. Almost all amphibians, because if you touch an amphibian and touch your face, it'll burn. Almost all of them. We have some over here that'll kill you. I don't know if those guys will kill you, but don't eat them. But either way, if Massimo will ever watch this, or anybody who knows about this location ever sees this, please feel free to comment below or reach out to one of us and let us know anything more about this. Because that's one of the other things I imagine that's hard about judging is you're not going to be intimately familiar with every subject and every location. So you kind of have to, use your best, no pun intended, judgment when viewing these kinds of images.
I think also freshwater shots, like we've just seen on the last two, do tend to do especially well in competitions compared to the number of entered shots of them. And I think that's because, most underwater photographers don't shoot in freshwater. You see far fewer of them in the competition. So they naturally stand out when you have good ones.
Yeah.
And particularly shots of amphibians because, amphibians with arms and legs and faces have a bit more natural charisma than, say, a fish. And so I think the charisma of the subject, the rarity of the shots in the entry, I think places them very highly. I think the flip side of that is many would argue, well, actually, if you look at the history of photographic competitions, amphibian shots are very highly rewarded, and maybe we should be looking for photographers to move the game on. And I think visually this shot does move the game on. It's a really nice shot of a really cool creature in a really cool setting. Anyway, we should move the slideshow on because we've been chatting away for ages on this one. Right, next up, it's a blackwater shot of a jack inside a jellyfish.
So this is by Andrea, and I apologize if I mispronounced the last name, Micheludi. This won the compact category.
It's a great Blackwater shot. I mean, it's quite a common subject combination, having, the jacks inside the jellyfish. But this is a particularly beautifully coloured jellyfish with all that purple on it. And I like the fact that he's captured a really good position of the jack where you can still see the eye of the fish very clearly and you can figure out what it is. So initially you might think, oh, it's a jellyfish. Oh, it's got an eye. Oh, what's that eye? And it kind of draws you in very well. And then to do all of this with a compact camera as well, this is a shot that, any SLR or mirrorless photographer would be very, very happy to have produced on a Blackwater dive. So, that for me is always a good stake in the ground for a quality compact picture. If you get a shot that measures up against the shot that people could take with potentially superior cameras, you're doing a good job. And I think this shot does all of that very well.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that I really like about this is the jack is totally inside the jellyfish. It looks like it's all nice and cozy in there, but like you said, you can still tell what it is because you can see the eye of the fish and you can see the tail. So you can kind of figure out, oh, it's a fish inside a jellyfish, versus it just being like an eye in there, which would be a little more confusing if you don't know this behavior. But like you said, I've seen this picture a few times. I don't think I've ever seen it with a jellyfish of this color. That makes it stand out a little bit more.
I think it's a slightly bigger individual jelly, and I think when the jelly's a little smaller, they're a bit more yellower. Okay. I think they may. I mean, I don't know, but it looks. I presume it's just one jack species and one jellyfish species, and it's not lots of jacks and lots of jellyfish. But they're usually smaller than this because you can see this is quite a big jack comparatively so, and it's also the jelly therefore is a little bit bigger and does seem to be a different color. Right, I'm going to roll this into the next one. Which is a very dramatic image of a scorpion fish eating a lizard fish.
So also by Andrea Michelutti. This won the macro category. And it's the last, like you said, it's the last moments of a poor little lizard fish's life.
Yeah, and I like that aspect, the fact it's a lizard fish, because most of the predation shots you see are lizard fish eating other fish, often little puffers and things like that. And they're swallowing them down. So I think that, lots of photographers who've seen that and felt sorry for the small fish will feel some revenge on the lizard fish, that now they have become prey. There's always a bigger fish, as they say. But for me, what I like about this shot is the portrait of the scorpion fish with this very dramatic lighting, the great symmetry, would be already a very strong shot. And then add to that the fact it's actually caught behavior in the middle of taking such a powerful portrait is, for me, really fantastic. I really love the lighting of this image in conjunction with the behavior is very impressive. And I presume because Andrea predominantly shoots with compact cameras, that this is another compact picture as well.
Yep, it looks like it's probably likely the same trip because both of them are from Onalao, all the same equipment. And the part that really sticks out to me is it's hard to anthropomorphize a fish because they don't have very human faces often. But the lizard fish looks pretty sad and scared, which I think adds to the overall effect. You have this big demonic looking scorpion fish. Like you said, the poor little lizard fish, that's usually the bane of all the other little fish on the reef. The tables have been turned on them.
Yeah.
Really cool moment to capture.
Demonic's a very good word for this picture. It's really cool. Right, and then our final one is back to the realm of Blackwater, and it's a picture of a paper nautilus or argonaut on a leaf. And it's taken with a long exposure combined with the photographer sneezing. So that's my bias there. I always the Blackwater shots that have movement blur for the sake of it. I often, instead of, I never get around to doing it, but when I see them on Instagram or Facebook, I always, want to say bless you to the photographer because they were obviously sneezed while they were taking the picture because there's no other reason why the camera's suddenly done that in the middle of the shot. But I do understand from a competition point of view why adding that blur is a way of adding something extra to the image to help your picture stand out. And so as a contest technique, fair enough for the sneeze shot. And this one is a great sneeze shot combined with really good subject matter. You've got this bright white Argonaut, female, sitting on this lovely yellow leaf, which are very strong subjects. Personally, I understand why the judges might go for a sneeze shot. They like that red velvety effect from the red spotting light that was used to create that effect during a longer exposure in this picture. But I find it does kind of, to me, go across the top of the subject a little bit and stops you connecting with the Nautilus. So I don't love that aspect of this shot. And I think I would have preferred it with white light, thinking about it, because I think then it would have looked, instead of it just looking like a random bit of red, the white light would have been then the same color as the leaf. And it would have looked like the leaf was fluttering in the water, as they often do if you see leaves floating down through the water column. And then I think that would have been perhaps a more interesting effect rather than having this red blur around the leaf. You'd have the leaf looking like it was fluttering in the water, and then it would have felt like natural movement rather than photographer sneeze generated movement. So I can understand why it's a winner. I would also award pictures like this for the photographer going that extra mile and creating the technique. But I actually think in this case, a white light blur would have been more effective photographically.
So this is by Andre Moyo, and this won the Blackwater category. My biggest thing here is I would, and this would be easy to do in post even, is just to have the Nautilus pop a bit more, just brighten the Argonaut just a tad more, because it's obviously prominent in the frame, but it looks a bit dull. And I think an easy fix would be just to brighten it up a tad, and so your eye would go more to it.
Yeah. I've just pulled the previous picture up and gone back to it, and you can see how flat this picture looks as in comparison.
Yeah, and I'm generally not, similarly to you, I'm not a fan of using the multicolored lights that aren't white for this kind of thing, just because I think they don't look quite natural. And for me, and this is obviously very personal, I prefer things to have a more natural aesthetic to them. So if you're going to do anything creative with the lighting, I prefer it to be white. Again, personal taste. But I think that would also, like you said, would show the movement a bit better versus having just the red blur. Because initially when I first looked at this, I was like, oh, it's some sort of double exposure because there's two layers of the leaf. And obviously, if you look at it for more than a second, you realize it's not. But I would just like it to have been, I think then you said the Nautilus would also stand out a bit better. The leaf, the actual color of the leaf would probably stand out a bit better. But, you know, hindsight's 2020. It's easiest for us to say that now versus necessarily in the moment. But it's a fantastic animal. And I think if he were going to do anything with this picture now, I might just brighten the animal a tad so it stands out a bit better.
Yeah. And, you know, when we do these discussions, it's pointless for us just to go through, oh, these are all great. I know people enjoy watching them because we cast a critical eye and we have those discussions, which I know that normal photographers do when they're with their friends. You know, underwater photographers, when they look through the results of competitions, they go, wow, aren't these great images? But they also cast a critical eye over them and goes, oh, I'd like that to be a bit different or this to be a bit different. And that thought process is very valuable for all of us because it's how we all improve. You know, if we're always thinking about ways images can be improved, when we next see our own shots, we should also be casting that same critical eye over them.
Yeah, I will say I am, one of the most helpful things for me is if I send a picture to somebody and I'm in a small group chat and we all send each other our images, and it's brutal. It's brutal in there with regards to feedback, which is useful because then when you know, when you get the positive feedback, you're like, oh, I nailed this one. Versus, you know, if everybody's like, yeah, they're all amazing and great, that's not especially useful other than like a little ego boost. So if you're actually trying to improve, you know, the harsh feedback can be very helpful and valuable, especially because you'll think about it the next time you're out shooting in a certain situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hopefully that was another valuable competition run through. I know these are always popular episodes, and people have already seen the images, so we know that they're coming here to hear what we say about them more than see the images, because obviously you can go visit DPG and see all those winners on there. There was also in this competition, remember, there was also a portfolio category.
Yes.
And I thought, and there were some very nice pictures in that portfolio category. We didn't put any in our slideshow because it was quite difficult, but I definitely encourage you, if you go and look at them, to look at those portfolio ones as well.
Yeah. That was Filippo Borghi. He won the portfolio category with some truly spectacular images in there. It would have
Apart from,
doubled
I
the length.
remember there was a really rubbish picture of an iguana, but the rest are excellent.
I don't remember the iguana, but I know there's a
I was
leopard
just
tail in
like,
there, so it automatically
why
caught my eye.
can't people like see a shot is so much worse than the others? It's always like with portfolios, you always get this like great, 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 great. What the fuck? Great, great.
um, but anyway, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next time on the Underwater Photography Show.